we've been covering wall to wall as much as we can the latest in Illinois' gun ban, because it's been nearly a month now since Governor J.B. Pritzker enacted a ban on certain types of weapons and magazines over a certain capacity that has a gun registry that begins October 1st with a deadline of January 1st for people to register those weapons. And that was something that was put through the Illinois statehouse in lame duck session and is now law. But there are dozens of lawsuits, not just in Illinois, across the country as well, when you combine them all together, that are challenging restrictive gun measures. And Illinois could be an interesting case because we've got state-level court cases that are challenging the procedural process of this, challenging the equal protections aspects of this by having the law carve out law enforcement or others in the security industry, while normal Illinoisans don't have certain rights under the Second Amendment. At least that's an argument for the equal protections issue. But you also have the issue of the Second Amendment, which is a lot of the federal court cases are challenging that, especially after a New York City case was in front of the U.S. Supreme Court last year, and you had a rifle organization, a shooting sports organization, sue New York State over their restrictive laws, and the U.S. Supreme Court coming back with precedent-setting orders that essentially changes how courts can view the Second Amendment and seeing it as a supercharged right. I talked with Todd Vandermeide yesterday and kind of just he laid out a slew of cases across the country that are essentially working through the process, and there's a lot of court decisions that are being made showing that these courts are upholding the Second Amendment as a so-called supercharged right.
New Jersey rule parts of their new carry law and a law about advertising against gun manufacturers and dealers unconstitutional based on the New York decision. You've had two judges democratically appointed in Colorado sit there and rule that based on New York, that their local semi-auto bans are unconstitutional and issued TROs. You've got the Fifth District Court of Appeals out of New Orleans in a Texas case rule that the civil side of domestic violence restraining orders that remove firearms is unconstitutional. You now have a district court in Oklahoma sit there and say that the prohibition on people possessing firearms who use marijuana is unconstitutional. What's important is that in at least the New Orleans Court of Appeals decision and the Oklahoma case, the government continues to argue cases or you shouldn't say cases, laws that were around the time of our nation's founding that stripped Catholics, Quakers, Native Americans, and slaves from owning firearms. That's their justification for upholding modern day prohibitions on individuals owning firearms. And it's, the courts are saying, no, it doesn't apply that way. And you've got the anti-gunners are trying to bootstrap every argument about the people that's contained in the Second Amendment, just as I had to educate former Representative Stonebeck about in committee, that only applies to certain law-abiding citizens. And the courts are beating that argument down. And they're making other, I think, specious arguments. And so what you see is the government at all levels, whether it be local level, state level, or even the federal level, clutching at whatever straw they have to try to maintain the status quo that they have. And it's going very badly for them in general.
So again, it's Todd Vandermeide, gun rights advocate. He's also the host of Freedom's Steel on YouTube. A lot of you in Illinois likely see him with his regular updates. He's also helping in the litigation that the federal firearms licensees of Illinois have in federal court, where they are trying to distinguish themselves from other federal court cases. Because in particular, and this is something else we'll talk about in the future, in particular, the FFIL lawsuit only deals with gun and gun parts, while the Illinois State Rifle Association's lawsuit or the National Shooting Sports Foundation's lawsuit deals with the gun and magazine ban. Vandermeide says that they're looking at a different lawsuit to come forward about the magazine ban. So you can see kind of different legal approaches while the state's trying to delay things and trying to consolidate things. We'll see how all this plays out. But I did talk with the state representative who's in charge of the Judiciary Committee, Justin Slaughter. Of course, lawmakers are in town this week. And Justin laid out, how he sees a lot of this going on across the country when it comes to these court cases. And he says that indeed it could mean that they're going to have to come back and have some conversations about the outcome of these court cases across the country, about the possible outcome of Illinois' court cases. Here's just about a minute and a half I had with Justin Slaughter yesterday at the state capitol.
This will certainly be on our radar, something that, obviously falls under our purview with, as you mentioned, the impending cases, lawsuits that are on the table. We'll be sure not to kind of step on the toes of what the judiciary and our courts are going to be embarking upon. But we certainly want to continue to have the conversation. Obviously, there's a lot of components that make up the dialogue, really throughout the public safety spectrum, if you will. So it's certainly something that we want to continue to concentrate on, continue to have these conversations about. In a lot of ways, Greg, this represents more than just this gun situation and even just the public safety issue. Whenever we pass a bill and it is signed into law, we'd like entities and individuals to be able to implement the law, right? And so this actually is symbolic, bigger than just this gun issue. And so in that regard, we kind of want to continue to kind of flush this out and make sure that, people feel comfortable about the laws that we're actually passing. More so from the perspective of doing a subject matter hearing, hearing the concerns, hearing the questions, getting clarity on certain perspectives, and like you said, also taking not just a local perspective on this, but also broadening this out. It's an issue that affects our entire country. How is this being, how does this play out in other parts of the country as well? So we'll take a look at all of these multi-pronged sort of approaches to the issue.
So again, it's Justin Slaughter. He is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, which will likely take up different types of bills filed that could impact the law-abiding citizens or criminals or the criminal justice system, or gun legislation, for instance, as we saw was debated in that committee in the previous General Assembly. What did Todd Vandermeide have to say in response to that? Stay tuned. We'll get to that here in a moment on WMAY. We've been talking about how there's a ton of court cases all across the country in the aftermath of the New York decision on the Bruen case, which has set new precedents for courts across the country to rule on gun challenges. A couple of the really high-profile ones being that, prohibiting cannabis users from accessing their Second Amendment rights is unconstitutional. Also prohibiting people who are not convicted of domestic violence, but are under civil domestic violence protective orders. Again, that's not after a conviction in front of a jury. That's just an order that can be entered with a preliminary hearing by a court, and a court saying that that's not enough to prohibit somebody's Second Amendment rights. So that could possibly impact red flag laws. So, with all of that in mind, I had asked the chairperson of the House Judiciary Committee, Justin Slaughter, if there's going to be more conversations about all of this. And that's on top of the couple of dozen, well, not couple of dozen, I should be more, there's probably about 10, 11, 12. Todd Vandermeide told me about 15 that he's counted or so. But we're tracking several in state court, several in federal court, challenging Illinois' gun ban and registry, and different levels that are being challenged, either the entire law or the gun ban and the parts ban. Could see more challenges coming down the pike here. But this is all going to be part of a deeper conversation, Justin Slaughter says, as part of some subject matter hearings. Well, I relayed that to Todd Vandermeide, who has spoken to lawmakers, warned them in the past about passing something that's unconstitutional because of the New York Bruin decision by the Supreme Court. And here's what he had to say.
Now, I have a split thought on that. First off, they didn't listen to us the last time. If you replay my testimony in front of the committee, I pointed out in detail where they were running afoul of the Supreme Court in 4 decisions. They didn't listen. I told them they were going to have problems with enforcement, and they still have not answered those questions. So on one hand, it's interesting to go back there and say, I told you so. At the other hand, it's like, do we really want to educate them to make them any smarter about this? Because as you know, during the prospects of the bill that Representative Morgan brought forward, we did not argue the particulars of the bill very much. We let them draft whatever they were going to draft because we were not going to help them build a better mousetrap. So I have some mixed feelings about it, but if they want to sit down and have an honest conversation, we can have that. I just don't think they're going to like what they hear.
And again, what they will hear is that the law they passed is unconstitutional, that the courts are seeming to go in lockstep with the U.S. Supreme Court decision, that it's no longer about balancing interests of public safety outweighing civil liberties and constitutional rights, which seems to have been what previous court precedent was. Now, the Supreme Court has said you have to rule on Second Amendment issues as if the Second Amendment is a supercharged right. And a lot of courts and decisions that have been made in the past few weeks around the country seem to be falling in that particular category of the Second Amendment being a supercharged right. And so all of this is going to play out. Now, just a review of some of the state level cases. You've got still pending the Macon County temporary restraining order. We'll be keeping an eye on that. Has yet to drop. That's after the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the Effingham County temporary restraining order. And then after that, you had White County temporary restraining order issued. So we could have possibly 3 different temporary restraining orders from state level courts against Illinois' gun ban and registry. But then in federal court, you've got the Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois with the Illinois Gun Rights Alliance lawsuit, where Vandermeide says they've filed a response to a brief filed by the state looking for a delay. You've got the Illinois State Rifle Association case, where the judge there has requested or given acceptance of a delay requested by the state, so they don't have to respond until March 1st. Then you've got the National Shooting Sports Foundation lawsuit. You've got another lawsuit from Crawford County that was transferred to federal court. You've got the McHenry County case that was transferred from state court to federal court. So you can see there's a lot of moving pieces, but there was an effort to try to consolidate some of these federal lawsuits into the hands of an Obama-appointed judge, but that seems to have not been allowed, as a Republican-appointed judge was the one to first get a case which was filed by the Illinois State Rifle Association. So if that's the case, then all of these cases, if they're consolidated, they're going to be in the hands of a Trump-appointed judge. So just some of the back and forth, the legal wranglings, all of this, a lot of moving pieces, but here we are close to a month now of Illinois' gun ban being in place, and the lawsuits are stacking up.